Hello, Mark Lowdy here. Here's a new word that you might find in financial statements during the current earnings season or in earnings announcements during the course of this year. And that is the word deconsolidation. Now, this has a potentially big impact on you as an investor. And in the next couple of minutes, we'll talk about what deconsolidation means, the impact that it might have, and obviously also whether the companies that you've invested in will have to deconsolidate their financial statements. So before we get into deconsolidation, let's talk about what consolidation actually means. In the past, if let's say you were the CEO of a listed company and you looked across the other subsidiaries and associated companies that you owned stakes in, you would have made a decision to consolidate their revenue numbers into your own. In other words, in the past, companies were able to fatten their top line, in other words, show a much bigger revenue number, just by consolidating the revenue that was earned by the subsidiaries or associates that they owned stakes in. It was a very easy way for companies to say, we own, let's just say, 75% of another company, therefore we lay claim to all of their revenue. And so the consolidation process meant that even fairly small listed companies were able to show some very substantial revenue numbers on account of those stakes that they owned in other firms. Now, the decision on whether they were able to consolidate those revenue and profit numbers was purely based on what sort of stake they owned in those subsidiaries. So once again, let's just say you're the CEO of a company. You might say, well, as a result of owning, let's say 60, 70% in another company, in a subsidiary, on the basis of that, we're going to consolidate the revenue. But, and here's the important change, starting this year, beginning of January 2014, a new financial reporting standard has come into force, the FRS 110. And in essence, what it means is that companies can no longer consolidate, that is, lay claim to the revenue and profit numbers of their subsidiaries and associates purely based on how much of a stake they owned. Now there is a power or control test. And this is how it works. It's illustrated here on this pyramid. If your company matched or was able to meet all three of these criteria, only then can you consolidate the revenue numbers. And those three criteria are here on the screen. The one at the bottom is power over the investee. Again, imagine you're the CEO of a listed company. Ask yourself, do you have control over these companies that you've invested in, over these associates and subsidiaries? If the answer is yes, let's look at step 2, moving up the pyramid. Do you have a right to variable returns? That's the next test. In other words, are you able to say, depending on how the subsidiary or associate goes, we will take a share of that? And then there's the one at the top, which is the ability to influence the returns. Do you have control over those investee companies where you can say, we want to get a greater return from them? So if you have met all three of these criteria, then and only then can you consolidate the revenue and profit numbers from the subsidiary into your own. So it's no longer about owning a majority stake. It is about how much power and control do you have over the subsidiary. So what does this mean for your investments? Well, you might come across a case or two, or perhaps more, where the companies that you own shares in have to deconsolidate some of their revenue numbers. And that's because those companies will have looked at their subsidiaries and associates and decided that actually, we do own a substantial stake in that company, and in the past we've consolidated their numbers. But based on these criteria, actually, we don't have control. And as a result, they will have to deconsolidate the revenue and profit numbers from their own accounts. The end result might well be that the revenue numbers will fall purely because of this deconsolidation process. So the next step for you is then to check with the companies that you own shares in and ask, perhaps even at the annual general meeting, about deconsolidation. Has there been any deconsolidation as a result of the FRS 110 financial reporting standard and the change that came into effect at the beginning of this year? I guess the consolation is that there is actually no cash impact. All of what we're talking about is actually accounting speak. In other words, it is what the accountants deem these numbers to be. But still, if you are in for if you get a rude shock for the fact that there's been a big decline in sales and revenue, it might just be because of this deconsolidation process. As always, talk to your licensed financial advisor. Perhaps they'll be able to explain it even better than I can. Or the Securities Investors Association, which will obviously also happy to put you in touch with people who can explain this in greater detail.